Various scholars have joined Martin Debelius in calling this passage the thankless thanks. It's not as if Paul is incapable of thanking human beings. In Romans 16, Paul thanks Prisca and Aquila for risking their lives for him, but he never once uses the word in this passage. Paul never once says thank you. Let's try and figure out why. Paul's tone is full of warmth. He begins, I rejoice, following the one of the major themes of this letter. I rejoice greatly, he says. The word is megalos, a word not used anywhere else in the New Testament. Very powerful word. I rejoice greatly in the Lord, he says. Typical of Paul, he's constantly focusing on God as the strength of his joy. But then he says, because you're... Now the New Testament word here is phronein in the Greek. And Gerald Hawthorne translates it, because your thoughtful care. It's a word that is about both the mind and the emotions. Because you have the same mind and feeling. Actually, it's the same word as is used in verse 2 when Paul tells Euodia and Syntyche, please, will you phronein one another? Will you have thoughtful care towards one another? Often translated agree, but that kind of makes it more a cognitive thing of the mind. And the word is very much about empathy. Because, he says, your thoughtful care of me has blossomed again. Paul has been cut off from this church for a while because of his imprisonment. And he's asking himself, just naturally wandering mind and wondering, do they still care? And now he's delighted to know that they care. As a church, we went into lockdown, didn't we, with a little bit of a car crash. Some of the words used by you in this phoning exercise we've been getting well into now. Disappointed, confused, flabbergasted, surprised, sad, upset, angry, embarrassed. And Paul is also wondering, what does the church think of me? On the surface, it seems like there's no disagreement between Paul and the Philippians, but what about under the surface? Why these words of thankless thanks? Paul tells the Philippians with some relief that he's delighted to discover their phronein, their thoughtful care of him. When two people who disagree reach out to one another in empathy, there is great beauty. That's what he has encouraged Euodia and Syntyche to do. And that seems to be what's happening here, right in this passage. Paul has left this delicate matter right to the end because he desperately wants to express himself well. And here's what seems to be the problem. The Philippians have done exactly what he asked them not to. He told them not to send him a personal gift. Paul was more than happy to receive gifts to pass on to the poor in the church in Jerusalem, constantly making collections for that purpose. But he told them not to send him a personal gift, and they have. Bless their cotton socks. See, when Paul headed west in his missionary ventures, the nearer he got to Corinth, the more concerned he was about what was, frankly, the normal means of missionary support, which is personal support to the individual from individuals and churches. But it was also quite normal that he who pays the piper calls the tune, and so those gifts often came with strings attached and people wanting to influence what you do. And Corinth, money-minded Corinth, which was just down the road from Philippi, was very much a place where patronage was rife wealthy patrons would support causes and then want to pull all the strings to make sure they did what they wanted. Does that sound familiar at all? And so Paul has really focused his missionary strategy down on, in Corinth, he's well known for setting up a tent-making business right next to the synagogue, most probably in the market square, right in the centre of town. A wonderful way to do missionary strategy in a way that he could be self-supporting and not dependent on others, and not having others pull the strings inappropriately and distract him from his God-given vocation. And so Paul has deliberately learned and taught himself the secret of discipline. He's learned not to connect his well-being to external circumstances. He is not going to be knocked out of kilter by going without, and he is not going to be knocked out of kilter by having too much. You learn this secret by practicing abstinence and engagement, by saying no and by saying yes, by saying no to the bad and yes to the good, and also by saying no to the good just to keep in practice and to make sure you're not getting addicted to it. We often call that fasting, whether it's food, wine, anything. And Paul has the task of telling the Philippians how much he appreciates them warmly, but communicating at the same time, I really hope you won't do that again. And it's a real lesson, this little passage, in how to disagree with warmth and love. Euodia and Syntyche were probably leading lights in the Philippian church, women with strong convictions, but broken women who risked breaking the church. We too are a little bit broken, aren't we? We have a lot to celebrate, much to thank God for. Alan Murray was reminding us as deacons about how just a year ago we finally made the decision to set up the pantry, and if we hadn't done that, we would have been doing nothing missional as a church during this lockdown process. But because we followed the Spirit's leading in that decision, we have had the wonderful opportunity to continue to be missional throughout. Praise God. But God also has a bit of repair work to do among us now. I do so hope that we will let him, because it's that unity in diversity that sends such a powerful message to a world in which difference so easily seems to spill over into hatred and brutality. Paul didn't mind so much in the end that the Philippians went against his own wishes, because he could see that their motivation was one of thoughtful care. And it comes across clearly through all of Paul's letters that Paul cares more about love and unity than about getting his own way, even when his own way feels fundamental to his own sense of mission and vocation. I so hope and pray that we will do the same.